Welcome to Prize Fighters, Circus Freaks, and Gangsters.
And we are talking about everything 19th century, all things 19th century. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Greta.
And we are in the third episode of the amazing Western, I guess it's a martial arts Western, Warrior.
This one's called John Chinaman.
We're 3 episodes in, and this series is absolutely unreal, right?
Oh yeah, and I feel like this is the episode where we've met all of our characters, we have a little bit of backstory on them, and now everything starts to get real.
Yes, and the characters are getting even richer, which is amazing because I feel like in a lot of TV shows, you almost have to invent a lot of the character for the people in the show. That's how you end up with a lot of the fanfic, is people are filling in the backstory to make the story make sense. And with this, you don't need any of that. It seems like everything that isn't explained is easily understood. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, for us, with our interest in history, the other nice thing is that sort of what I do know of Chinese history, what I do know of Chinese American history, it fits. I'm not having to say, oh, well, this very exceptional thing is so different or something like that. It's like, oh, no, that totally fits in with what I know about how these people work, which I think is even cooler.
Absolutely. And, you know, they really harp upon how bad the economy is in the show. And I didn't pick it up the first time that I watched it because at the time I didn't realize we were in the midst of a long depression that lasted almost 60 years and was crushing at the time. And but this subject keeps coming up over and over and over again. And there are so many parallels between the past and the present in this. All of these, like every subplot of this has a direct corollary in the modern day. And I love it to death.
Oh, I think that's spectacular. One of the things is you wonder, why would people sort of risk their lives in these insane ways? But then you realize that they're coming from incredibly lousy circumstances where they've really
right.
been hurt. Of course they're going to take insane chances because they're coming from somewhere that's worse.
Yeah, and this is, we don't really get a picture of what China looks like in this show, but we at least have the understanding is even being treated like cattle in the United States is preferable to their situation across the ocean.
Yeah, one of the things that really stands out, if you do know something about that period in China, is if you were living in a city or even if you were living in a village, the amount of personal space you have is incredibly limited. And here in San Francisco, no matter how crappy it is, you've got elbow room for days.
Right. And there's always the chance to start over again 2 miles down the road.
Yeah. In fact, not bringing your past with you or bringing part of your past with you has a lot of implications for a lot of the characters in this particular episode. So let's get started with breakfast at the fanciest hotel in town.
Oh, yes. And again, it's my pick for the hottest guy on this show. He struts into this place that he clearly doesn't belong. And he is every bit the mobster that it really does show that, like, the Irish started what became the Italian mob. You see all of the same tendencies in it. And I love the mannerisms of it. Everything about it is. What did you love most about this scene? Why don't you go ahead and set it up, because I did not set it up very well.
Okay, so you've got Mr. Mercer, Mr. Rich Dude. He's the one who's going to lay the cable car. He's got all the connections in with City Hall. He's there. He's very glossy, his freshly shaven face, his hair's all lying down, his smooth, fine wool clothes, sitting down at this white tablecloth set with silver and crystal and French pastries and everything. And then in struts Leary in his rough clothes, his slightly disheveled hair, his complexion that's been outside, every day of his life for hours on end, working hard. And he just plops down on the other side of the table.
But he's perfectly, the wardrobe on him is perfect because his clothing is worn but not threadbare. Like you said, it's rough, but he doesn't look poor. He just looks like a man who works with his hands.
Yeah, no, his clothing is high quality, it's competent, it's not threadbare. It's the clothing you would want for the jobs that he has. He's dressed for his jobs just the same way Mercer is dressed for his job, and it sets up this perfect contrast of these two powerful men, especially I mean, the baller move as far as I'm concerned is he, takes the apple and he whips out his own big fucking
Oh,
knife.
yeah, yeah. And it's like a switchblade or whatever.
Yeah, it's a clasp
So
knife.
it makes
Yeah.
that a distinctive chink when he pops it out, and everybody's head turns in this place because already this man is a ruffian, and he's in this place that he absolutely shouldn't be by the standards of classism at the time,
Bingo.
and he just the effrontery of it to. I mean, he did everything but put muddy boots up on the table. He's stealing food from each other's table from other tables, and it's amazing.
Yeah. So, and then it becomes one of those, walk softly, carry a big stick because he's not yelling. They sit down. It's sort of like, okay, we're going to have a civilized conversation while I completely extort the hell out of you.
Right, right. But of course, the person he's trying to extort is a magnate of his own right, and so he's not going to be pushed around, and he's already outmaneuvered Leary right out of the gates, which I find amazing. But then he goes strutting out like he won the exchange. So the whole thing was fun.
Yeah, so what it comes down to is Leary and Mercer have decided that the Irish are going to work on the cable cars, and Leary's going to kind of be their boss and keep things cool. And, let's have this be a quiet, civilized criminal action building these cable cars. Calm down, everyone.
Right, yeah. What's everybody getting so excited about anyway?
So we go from there. We get our cool opening scene. And warrior, and you think about it, the way it's set up, especially in the beginning, like, okay, Ah Sahm is our warrior dude, but of course, where is he right now? He is in court.
Yes, up on charges for the aggravated assault of those two extremely innocent, poor white chaps who happen to be just minding their own business and were unduly assaulted by this crazy man.
And they're also completely dopey pawns, and they don't realize it.
They have the most hilariously stereotypical Irish names too. It's like Seamus O'Hanrahan or something like that.
They're the O'Shea.
Oh,
The
yeah.
O'Sheas,
Yeah.
and and they're a father and son.
Yeah. I mean, they did everything but have a leprechaun pop out of their pockets.
Oh, the facial hair is great. And so Ah Sam's in court. It's like he doesn't have any defense. These two guys are here to testify, and it looks like he's in trouble. So we scooch right on to Mai Ling running the numbers racket.
Yes, and what a boss she is. Just a boss. Both the women in this are just such bosses. And their presence is exceptional. And the way that Mai Ling speaks is... It's so authoritative and quiet at the same time. I feel like there's something for me to be learned there because I'm such a loud, boisterous person. I need to learn how to assert myself quietly the way she does.
Yeah. I did have a lot of fun when he pops open the box and you see like that nice mixture of currency on there. And I was just like, yeah, that is 100%. And there's the nice gold doubloon sitting on top. I mean, Spanish dollars, Spanish silver pieces of 8 were legal American currency until 1857.
Were they really?
They were. I just learned that recently. So the fact that they're using all sorts of currency willy-nilly in these gambling institutions, I was like, oh, spot on. Nice job.
Huh, that's, I caught that there was a mix of coins and bills. And so he opens this lockbox to show Mai Ling the crazy amount of money that he's making. And then to pitch to her that he can expand and make more money. So I was focused more on what they were talking about than the money in the box, but I didn't even realize that they had currencies from different places, but it makes sense. I mean, you're even going to get German currency then. You're going to have currencies from all over the world.
Oh, yeah. It's a port city with everybody, stopping in from their trips around the world because the whaling industry was happening big time at this point. So, yeah, you have sailors from everywhere stopping in, gambling, dropping their coin and moving on. So yeah, it's going to be from everywhere. But yeah, the guy comes in and says, hey, I'm making you some nice money, but I could make you more money. And so he thinks he's coming in with a proposition to tell Mai Ling what's what, but she turns the tables on him.
Ah, such a boss. Such a boss. What was it that she quibbled on and got him, and then ended up was like, yeah, I'll go ahead and take half your pay for the next couple weeks. So make sure you get those renovations done quicker.
So he shows up and says, hey, how about I get your permission to tear down the bar next door and expand my gambling institution to take in even more money. So he comes in with this as his idea, and she's like, great idea. In fact, now that you've suggested it, you should do it. And I'm only going to give you half your pay until you get it done. So chop, chop, get it done faster. She completely just yoinks his idea out from under him. And suddenly he ends up owing her and he's not sure what happened.
Yeah. Because he said 3 to 4 weeks. And she was like, okay, have it done in 3. And as an incentive for you to hurry it up, half pay until you're done with the renovations.
And she's got Li Yong, the gangster monk fighter guy, kind of standing in the shadows. So
he gave her a little bit of flip attitude, I think, is what brought on that half pay thing. But it just shows how quick she is to impose herself in any situation. I mean, the knives are out literally and figuratively with this woman at all times. She's a misogynist's worst nightmare, this woman.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's spent so much of her life being taken advantage of and following the rules, and it got her nowhere. And so she's like, not only am I not going to give anybody an inch, I'm going to take every single one I can get my hands on.
I remember what it is. So she is sitting as the spokesman for her husband, who is ailing and basically dying, and he's the mobster. And so It was... She said, go ahead, you have 3 weeks, go ahead and get that done. And he said, well, shouldn't we speak to your husband about this? And that's when she was like, bitch, that's half your pay. Get it fucking done and get out of my sight. That was so baller. Because she's the one running things, and she wants everybody to know I'm the one who has the last word. I don't have to ask daddy or my husband or anybody.
Exactly. And then speaking of somebody who does have to ask her husband, we meet Penny going into the saloon, and I was like, oh, you are not supposed to be here. The mayor's wife wandering in to just, like, yes, it's the saloon where the lawyers go, so she's not like in the Irish Quarter or something, but still, unaccompanied woman.
But she is doing exactly what she is not supposed to be doing, which is talking to her ex-boyfriend. That was really fun. So he's drinking himself to death because she left him for the mayor, because her dad basically sold her into this marriage so that he could build a railroad. And now she's this pawn, and he hates her because she had to do what her dad said, and he's drinking himself to death over it. And then she comes to him and is like, this person tried to defend me and I need you to help him. And he was like, go fuck yourself. I'm going to drink myself to death. I'll get fired if I try to help.
So do they explain this later in the series? Because at this point, like, I'm piecing this together. I don't.
No. They just show it right there. That's what I'm saying. It's so subtle. It's so subtle because he basically, all we get is, no, you took care of that. When she says something like, are you doing all right? Or you look like shit or whatever it is. And he's like, yeah, that's your fucking fault. Yeah. And that's when we're like, oh, he's drinking himself to death because she left him.
Right.
And she's going, I didn't have anything to do with that. I'm sorry, but I need your help. And he's like, nah, I'll lose my job. And also, this is awful.
Yeah. So then I feel like we get to the final new conflict of this episode when Bill O'Hara shows up and tosses these enforcers into Ah Sam's cell. And they're like, God, this guy's too uppity. You got to take care of him down in the prison.
Oh, yeah. And so these 4 guys get in the cell, and you know that they want smoke the second they get in there. And they all look, so they're pretending to be drunk when they get in there, and Ah Sam's just sat there, it perfectly Bruce Lee, just sitting there kind of pretending to meditate. Meanwhile, he's just waiting for these idiots to do something, and they all pull out weapons the second they get in there, and he just trashes them. It takes no time. And the fight scene's amazing, too. It's so brutal. And also, I couldn't help but think while I was watching this, when the one guy, because somebody else from another cell reaches through and grabs him, because that always happens in jail movies.
Yep.
And he breaks that guy's arm. And I was just thinking, my God, If there's one thing that would be worse than being in what had to have been an old Spanish jail that is now like a medieval Spanish jail, and now you have a broken arm.
Yeah,
that's possibly a compound fracture because he snapped it through a jail, like through the bars of a jail cell.
Like wrapping it around the bar, basically.
Yeah. He basically slapped himself with his own hand accidentally.
No, that was a beautifully done fight. It took advantage of the completely confined spaces. It was a beautifully choreographed fight, and I really enjoyed it. And it was a big switch for Ah Sahm. It was sort of like this switch flipped in his head, where he was just trying to chill the dudes out on the street. But here he's realizing, I'm going to die if I don't kill these guys, basically.
You know, part of the way you notice that is he hits people with a closed fist. Like he's trying to just stop them with open hands, and he's hitting them all in the chest and stuff like that. And then somebody will stab him or something. And he's like, oh, well, fuck it then. I'm going to kill you guys.
Yeah, no, he really realizes that it's not for play anymore. He can't just, hit somebody and walk away, that this one's for keeps, and he's going to fight like that. I even more appreciate his on-the-street fighting style being contrasted with this fighting style. That's one thing I'm really enjoying about this series is how they use combat to build character or to show character. I think that's fantastic.
They really do. Not only do they show the ethics of each character in their fighting, their choice of weapons, what they fight over, that sort of thing, but they convey a lot with somebody being educated or uneducated based on whether or not they can throw a punch. It's really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's also, until I had kind of researched more of martial arts history, because when I was growing up, we were all obsessed with karate books. We were buying karate books at book sales. At the elementary school book sale, it was just like karate books. That's all we bought. We just bought karate books and went home and did karate, punched each other in the face. And but we didn't really know how we got this idea that fighters from the East were like these bad motherfuckers. Like they were all ninjas. We all had that impression. And then the karate movies in the 70s really kind of drove that back into our mindset. But in that era, it was really true because there had been, like I said, China was an incubator for insane hand-to-hand combat styles because they were trying to overthrow the Qing and they had all those rebellions. So these were seasoned badass fighters who a lot of them had been taught in Shaolin monasteries or had been taught by guys who were trained in Shaolin monasteries that had then trained all of these gangsters and mobsters who came over to the US so they didn't starve to death in China. So like, these are bad dudes, like dudes who have committed horrible war crimes and all this stuff against starving Irishmen who are drunk 24 hours a day.
Oh, yeah. And I feel like when Richard Lee, the Georgia jawline, catches O'Hara up to this no goodness, like that sets up this conflict. Like Richard kind of knew he didn't like O'Hara, but now he really doesn't. And then for me anyway, I felt like, okay, we've got the board laid out. You've got Richard Lee versus Bill O'Hara. You've got the O'Sheas versus Mai Ling.
Each of whom has their own vices too, which I find interesting.
Yes.
Although, yes, because the one it likes his opium and the other likes his gambling. So they both have their weak point, which I find really, really interesting. And the Chinese have a hook in them for both of those weak points.
Yeah, and then you just have the whole Irish versus the Chinese. There's the labor conflict, but then there's also the brothel conflict. There's the gang conflict. I just feel like at this point the board is being laid out. You can sort of see where the fracture lines are going.
Yep, Irish versus Chinese, North versus South too, because that comes up every time Lee opens his mouth. Somebody goes, "Oh, goddamn Southerner,"
and you sort of get to the flip side of it where Mayor Blake is like, okay, I see. He thinks he knows how the board lies, but he does not get it because he goes out there and he makes the speech like, these foreigners taking jobs from good Americans. And so do we know where Mayor Blake gets his money? Is he old money or is he new money?
I don't think that's been established yet.
Okay,
and I don't think it's historically based, so I don't think it would do any. It would give us any reason to. But Mayor Blake wouldn't have married money if he had money. So he has to have been a self-made politician who's just shrewd and knows how to, work all the
True.
angles. And that's why he married money. Because that's always been the way that the merchant class gets into nobility, is they marry into nobility. They have a bunch of money, and then they find a poor noble. And I know, because my wife has had me watching all these British nobility shows.
She's on.
And so they find a poor noble who needs money, and then they marry the daughter, and they give a dowry to the father, and then he can keep, paying his nights so he can oppress the serfs and all that.
But it strikes me that Blake's a great talker and he's a manipulator, but I don't think he's ever been a fighter. He doesn't strike me as somebody who had to like really work hard and kind of fight his way up.
No, I think it's one of those clear like merchant class marrying the aristocracy kind of thing.
Yeah, whereas Buckley, his right-hand man, he's the guy who understands the brutality involved in all of this.
Yes, he is clearly a war criminal of some kind, although we haven't really gotten anything other than he has a nasty stump of a leg.
Yeah.
And is an evil bastard of a man who is playing all sides against each other at all times.
Right. Whereas, Blake's out for the main chance, but he always wants to keep things smooth with every faction. He doesn't want to piss any side off too much, and
because he wants to make money.
Yeah. He just wants to smooth everything over and just keep riding the waves at the top, whereas Buckley definitely has an axe to grind. He is out to get somebody, and at some point, Bill O'Hara realizes that he's being used as the pointy end of the stick, and he's not sure how he feels about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's the pointy end of the stick he's either the pointy end of the stick or getting the shit end of the stick, like one way or another. And as the episode goes on, it just gets worse for him.
Yeah, and he's like, okay, I'm on the take, but I'm not on the take that good to be getting the shit kicked out of me or my guys. So he doesn't like what Lee's up to, but he also doesn't like putting himself in danger for other people's schemes.
Which doesn't fucking matter when you end up indebted to an Irish mobster because you spent the payoff money that he gave you to see a person not testify that didn't end up having to testify anyway.
Yeah. So O'Hara's getting a clue, and I feel like Ah Sahm finally is starting to get a clue too. He's going to get a few more clues. But
yeah, he's certainly not getting a clue at the rate that his sister wishes he would, but he is getting a clue.
But the fact that he asks O'Hara, wait, are there 3 guys waiting outside for me? You told me how to get out of the courthouse. You're just going to kick... O'Hara's like, no. I just want this thing
we
to
need
be
more
over.
than 3 guys for that, is what he says.
That was the best line.
Yeah, it was amazing because it was just true. He was like, no, you clearly wipe out anybody we put in there. So, I think we're good.
And the
and if anybody is watching this and thinks to themselves, because they've seen all these old Western shows, like, why doesn't somebody just shoot this man before he karate kicks him in the face? Because, you have that kind of impression that Indiana Jones scene could easily have solved most of these combat scenes. So I did a little research because I was curious.
Sure.
And I found that beginning in 1847, which was before San Francisco was actually incorporated, they started passing laws against people discharging weapons in public because minors kept shooting random people, like homeowners and things like that. They would just shoot at houses that had birds in the trees and things. And so after this man and his daughter were shot, they banned guns. And then they went through this period where they basically developed all of the arguments and counter arguments that we see in the modern gun debate. They come down to 2 sides: passive gun ownership and defensive gun ownership. Passive means we're going to rely on the cops, which is why in San Francisco at the time, everybody was doing that because they didn't want children to be shot. So everybody was going at it with hands. And then you had the defensive gun owners who wanted guns so that they could, potentially have the opportunity to, defend schools from children or something.
There you go. Well, and there's a lot of truth to that because at that point, guns were really a new toy for most people, and they didn't understand the destructive power. I don't think a lot of people understand their destructive power now.
I think they might have understood it better than we do because they were banned as hell over and over and over in San Francisco.
Right. But we have these images from, westerns and even like Deadwood and everything where it's just like the two bad dudes, they square off in the main street of the town and they have the gunfight. But that's not, you give somebody who's drunk 24/7 and kind of pissed off, they're like, guns are fun, and they just, yeah, like you were saying, they were just randomly shooting stuff because guns were exciting.
Yeah, so they banned them
And
all over the place. And there was even a town in Texas where, to prevent people from shooting each other, they had a method to end disputes where they would tie your left wrist together and then you would stab each other with your other hand until somebody quit.
Oh, that sounds fine. I mean, even into the 70s and 80s, you had plenty of country songs, Kenny Rogers and Johnny Cash are like, "Hey, leave your guns at home. That's not going to solve anything. You're just going to make a bigger mess, man."
Yeah, and also the implication was back then, and at least for me now, is if you're carrying a gun, it means you can't fight. Like, you can handle your business, then you're not going to be running around terrified and waving a gun in everybody's face.
But the reason we come to this point where the mayor has to make a speech and O'Hara has to help Ah Sahm escape is because when it came time for Ah Sahm to get the book thrown at him, the witnesses who were going to do him in didn't show up because, Mai Ling had gone and threatened the O'Shea's family with, grisly, grisly death.
Oh, and just the woman is so amazing and gorgeous and sexy and evil and imperious and genius and like all at the same time. But she is as cold and calculating as a snake. And when she put a knife to the little O'Shea daughter's neck but quietly, and was just saying that we would hate for anything to happen to your family or whatever, and it was just amazing. Like, she was terrifying, and she's just a tiny little thing, but she's just so amazing as a character.
Yeah, she never raised her voice, but again, you can see the way she's handling that knife.
And it just appears out of nowhere. Her hand comes out of the folds of her robe, and there's a knife in it.
Yeah, and at this point, women handled knives a lot just to cook food. So they were fairly competent with knives, but she's showing kinds of skill and a type of knife that, the O'Shea mother and, all the parents are going, "Oh,
yeah,
this is somebody you don't want to mess with."
Yeah, and her enforcer just blew the one man that was at the door directly out of his shoes. So he just, the guy just disappeared. So it was like, yeah, so we can do nothing against these people. And if we don't do what they say, they will come into our house and kill us. So they defy O'Leary and they don't show up in court. And that ends up not being great for them.
Right, yes. Because at that point, they're like, well, Leary's going to, really mess us up. But this threat is right in front of us right now. So no, we're not going to show up in court. So Ah Sahm gets off and he gets let go, and Leary is pissed. So first,
he's not happy. He's not happy.
And one of the interesting things that came out of that, because you always talk about Leary being a good mobster, like a very level-headed mobster, is he's telling these guys, like, look, this didn't go the way we wanted. Don't have your guys get all pissed off, drunk, and go beat up their wives, because that's gonna fuck up our side.
Yeah. So he doesn't punish any of the guys that got their asses kicked by Ah Sahm, because he says, I don't want to hear from your wives. Just go home, get the hell out of my sight. So he's being ethical again. And then you see him go to see the
O'Sheas.
The O'Sheas, yeah. And that's where I loved it, because I was like, oh, history, because they burned the O'Shea's house down as punishment.
Yes!
And that's exactly how the Irish handled every problem back then. And in New York as well, the Irish mob, they just burned shit down. And that's how they ended up undoing themselves, is they burn themselves out of places. And then they get the stuff would get rebuilt without them. So
it cracked me up because he goes, the fire brigade is here. And after watching Gangs of New York, I'm like, oh, everybody's in trouble now.
Yeah, everybody's going to get beat up and probably burned.
But yeah, so they burn down the house. They say, get the hell out of here. And of course, the O'Sheas have to leave basically with the clothes on their back and start over. And I think this is when it finally dawns on the O'Sheas that they were nothing but pawns. They started something they didn't know how to finish by, starting a fight with a woman who is dressed well that was a really dumb shit thing to do. And yes, they ended up sort of at the way bottom burned out bottom of the barrel.
I mean, they really dodged a bullet, because that's the mayor's wife that they were accosting. And, you know, because the cops were right there, so the cops would have shown up seconds later while they were beating up the mayor's wife, and the cops would have beaten that man to death. So at least he got to go home to his children.
Yeah, and he gets to leave town with them. But I think it was finally dawning on the O'Sheas that their idiot action turned into something everybody wanted a piece of. The Chinese got a piece of it, the Irish got a piece of it, the cops got a piece of it, and Mayor Blake got to make his speech on the courthouse steps.
Yeah, and he got to stand up to Buckley, evil-ass Buckley, in his ear, trying to hiss in his ear like a snake. He seriously is like a cartoon snake from a Disney movie, that guy.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the funny things I wanted to mention is when Barkley says you got to do something about those yellow bastards, or maybe it was Leary that said that. It was Carl Linnaeus who is responsible for Asians being called yellow, because when he was sort of dividing up the world into all of the, genus species stuff, he saw humans, because you think about humors, air, fire, water, earth, and then there's, yellow bile, black bile, blood, and phlegm.
Right.
It's these fours, and so Linnaeus saw the human race as four pieces.
What in the hell is black bile anyway? I've always wondered that.
So when you think about what goes on in medicine, phlegm is obviously like when you have a cold, that's phlegm.
Yeah.
Blood's easy. Yellow bile is lymph. So when you have a wound, we don't see this very much anymore because we have stuff like Neosporin and
oh yes,
soap.
they thought it was healthy for the pus to run.
Right, and yeah, it was because stuff washed out. But black bile is when you have coagulated blood. So think about like when people would get belly wounds or ulcers, or they would have intestinal problems. But anytime you would get a wound or an intestinal issue, or like some lung thing where you had blood clots, when the blood clots come out of you in various ways, it's black. And so that was the black bile.
When people do cupping, is that then, are they getting out their black bile?
I really don't understand how all of those things go together.
Okay, because the blood's always black when it comes out. It was on Anthony Bourdain, which is the only reason why I have ever seen anyone do cupping.
Oh, yeah. No, but what cupping does for people where it's effective is you do get like stickiness between fascia and muscle, and so you get stiffness and everything, and the cupping can kind of loosen that, which does cause some bruising, which again, you're going to get tiny little blood clots, which is going to cause things to be black.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah. So Linnaeus looked at the human race, and there are four colors associated with the four humors and, these four liquids in the body, and the colors are black, white, red, and yellow.
Okay.
And so when you looked around the earth, well, there's the black race, obviously. There is the white race, the ones on top. Okay. And then when they went to North America, they decided that instead of being copper colored or just, hey, they're a slightly different color than us, they became the red man. And with that knowledge from the 15th, 16th century in his brain, instead of being wheat colored or tan colored, which is how a lot of people in East Asia were referred to, he's like, well, to finish out my collector set, I'm going to call them yellow.
Yeah, because Power Rangers, obviously. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense. God damn. It astonishes me how fucking stupid people were back in the day. Like, even the smartest person, if they walked into a room, Aristotle walked into a room right now, we would probably be like, bro, you got to shut the fuck. Go stand in the corner. Just shut up. Go tell the corner about your humors, all right?
My favorite Aristotle thing is he thought all humans started out male, and it was only if a woman gestating the little male, like, homunculus, something was wrong with her, it came out female.
Ooh, his head would fall off if he found out the Y chromosome was disappearing. Jesus. That's gonna make the gender argument very difficult as well. Whenever, well, we all got the same chromosome, so you can kind of pick your poison. No! People are going to be mad.
Well, and that's where Henry VIII was coming from, too. It was all these women's fault. And you're like, no, actually, dudes are involved. But anyway.
That's where Henry VIII's CTE was coming from.
He did fall off too many horses.
He was a really nice, decent guy right up until the point that his leg was rotting and he had horrible CTE.
Yes. Yeah. No, he did. He definitely got whammed in the head that one time. And
yeah. Jousting is a bad idea.
Especially when you can get wounds that don't close for 35 years?
Yeah. Although he did, I found out that the one thing that did come out of that is he sponsored the shit out of hospitals. Because my question was, how the hell did he not sponsor the shit out of hospitals? Then I looked it up and he did sponsor the shit out of hospitals. I think because he was like, somebody fix my goddamn leg.
I wonder how much it had to do with him closing all the monasteries, which is where the hospitals used to be. And so he gave away all the monasteries to his buds, and he's like, Oh, yeah. Maybe we should get some hospitals back.
We do need hospitals. They're important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he giveth and he taketh away, I guess.
Yeah. So speaking of hospitals, we do get to find out what Penny is doing with some of her opium. She's drugging her husband.
Why not?
Yeah, and this is where it clicked together for me that the whole warrior thing, of course, when I went in, obviously, Ah Sam's the warrior and these are going to be his adventures. Right. But in this episode, you start to see every main character is coming from a battle of some sort. They're carrying their own scars, which is, setting them up to act the way that they act, or they want to be tough. And so they're working from a place where they're sort of like guessing how to be tough.
Right.
And so Penny and Ah Sahm, they pair them up for a hot second. But I think they're a great pair because both of them in their own ways were raised to follow a bunch of rules. She's following the rules of society so she can marry well, and she does, and it sucks. Ah Sahm obviously spent time in a monastery. He's like, okay, I'll learn to be the baddest assest fighter. And he is, but it doesn't keep him safe. And I think both of them are realizing that kind of right now.
Oh, that's something I had not realized, and that's a really, really good point.
And so there's a bunch of other cool pairs that are getting set up. Mai Ling and Ah Toy have both worked their way up to the pinnacle of power in their respective tongs. And so even though they're not directly in conflict yet, I can see eventually they will be. Father Jun, he's a badass warrior from his days in the Opium Wars. I see him kind of paired off with Barkley.
And that's a really interesting. So when we see Ah Sahm go back, he's out of prison and everybody's partying. And then Father June comes in, and you just know it's going bad. He's hanging his head right out of the gate. He's like, I'm fucked. And then I couldn't really tell at first what the hell was happening, and I realized he basically, I don't think he was punishing him for being a jackass so much as he was beating him into the gang.
Bingo. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I saw. He was being jumped in. He realized that Ah Sahm is kind of this chivalrous dumbass, and he needs to understand the discipline of the gang a little bit more. I'm sure it got back to him that Ah Sahm asked Wan Chao to hey, let me out. And so Father June said, no, we gotta beat this guy in. Before I get to that, I feel like Mayor Blake and Young June are kind of a pair because both of them have come up without having to really fight any sort of life or death, make serious choices kind of battle. They come up kind of protected, and they're manipulators, but they haven't suffered the same way everybody else has.
I don't know. Young June has killed a lot of people. He's not coming from a place of innocence.
No, I'm not saying innocence, but you sort of feel like, his father, Father June and, all of the fighters who sort of came over from China and had to really scrap their way up from the bottom. Even though he's a killer, he was born into privilege.
Yeah, so he really has a chip on his shoulder where he knows he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and his dad thinks he's kind of soft.
Yeah.
So he's got to go extra, extra, extra hard trying to impress his dad, which of course never works.
Exactly. And yeah, he's coming, he's definitely a brutal dude, but he's coming from a really, really different life experience from all of these people who had to make hard choices along the way. And I
He's also the
don't
most likable. Young June is the most likable person in this entire show. Like, I would want to be friends with Young June.
I don't know. He scares the shit out of me. He seems like the kind of guy who would just get bored with you and just cut your throat one day because it would be hilarious.
I don't know. I feel like so long as you were friends with him, he would be, yeah. If you were friends with him, it didn't
Sure.
matter if you bored him or not. He would just be like, he's fucking boring. Let's go do something else. But I think he seems like an intensely honorable guy. And he really likes Assam and wants Assam's approval. So I think if you're in that situation, Assam can basically do no wrong, it seems.
I believe that. Yeah, I think he definitely wants to impress. He wants to impress Assam, sort of like he wants to impress his father. They strike him as kind of these semi-magical figures somehow. But yeah, so we've got a bunch of these warriors who are coming at a bunch of problems that have been thrown at them from all sorts of angles, which again, I love this 8-sided fight that they've set up.
And it's perfect for the 19th century, which was an 8-sided fight apparently everywhere on the planet. Apparently there was not a place that wasn't everybody was fighting everybody the whole time. Makes no sense.
So getting back to Father June, when he says, all right, Ah Sahm, you've been a dumbass. We need to jump you in so you really understand where you belong. That's a tonfa that he's using?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, which eventually was adapted into nightsticks.
Yeah, okay. That's what I had thought. The sort of cult gang mentality that was on display there, I thought that was a really great flex by the writers. And that they're displaying, especially for a bunch of us comfy Americans who don't understand living with the brutality that these people are in the 19th century. You know, you think about people, I'm only beating you because I love you, and you don't understand why people would put up with being hit like that. It's because they're coming from such a place of fear and uncertainty that it creates this weird set of bonded safety, and just watching them play that out so precisely, including the part where he gives them the first hit and Assam catches it.
Yeah. Well, because there's a measure of trust there, too. He keeps saying, keep your hands down. And he has to trust that he's not going to take that thing in the face or over the head, or, that this guy's not going to just beat him to death. And he has to take these shots to the body, all these body shots that are going to hurt but not kill him. And so he just stands there and he takes this beating. And then all of a sudden, Father June loves him.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing. You talked about the Tongs forming as these benevolent societies and these protections for the Chinese immigrants and the Chinese sex workers that they needed. You think about the early Irish gangs when people came off the boats, there was somebody to welcome them in, a place to live, something to eat, a place to start. I mean, all of the gangs, even into the modern times, you think about motorcycle gangs. They were formed because Vietnam vets are like, hey man, I don't know how to do 1970s America after I've just spent all this time in Vietnam, and motorcycle gangs were a place for people to land. And I think we don't understand that generally in the American political scene, that we have these tribes.
Yeah, and it makes it makes the xenophobia at least understandable. It doesn't excuse the xenophobia, but it makes it understandable when you historically understand that the Irish weren't just showing up there and being like, I hate everybody. These people were starved and enslaved by the English in Ireland, and then they were sometimes transported to the United States and enslaved, or then they were transported to Australia and as prisoners, and they were forced to work as prisoners there, and then freed in a place that had no civilization. So then they got on a boat to San Francisco thinking, all right, we're going to be back in America. This is a place where we can, where people can be free. Lots of Irish people got their freedom from English oppression there. This is it. And then they get there and they're in the middle of a huge depression. And there's even more people coming in from other countries that are also looking for the same thing. And they're just like, God damn, when is it going to be my time? So, you understand,
Yeah.
But by the same token, you got the Chinese who are like, these people will hate us until the day we die. They think we're cattle, which is even worse, frankly.
Yeah. So it's really funny, this reluctance to provide any sort of social services. And you think about other societies, and a lot of time that sort of base layer of social service has been provided by, say, religious groups or, something. And by not having that in America, well, the gangs formed to serve that same purpose. And I really like how they're laying out that these things were formed originally as protection. Of course, they became these power centers. But again, I feel like there's some underlying richness.
Well, they still remain protection though, because
Right.
he's basically he's their union rep. He's going to the mayor as a union rep and being like, "You will hire my fucking people, or I'll break your legs." I mean, it's he is getting jobs for his people, just in a bit more vociferous way than modern union reps do it. Now they just use money rather than beatings.
Well, and this is one of those things, all of these, billionaires who are resisting unions, it's like, look, you either work with unions on a semi-legal, sort of straightforward basis, or you're going to end up working with, the 19th century version of them. People are going to band together because they need protection. That's just people being people.
Or you're going to end up working with a guillotine at some point, one or the other.
There were kind of a couple of fun historical things that showed up. I started seeing cigarettes in the background. And yes, cigarettes started to become a thing right about now. There's a lot of modern money, in fact, that's tied up in making cigarettes faster at about this time period. So that was a cool thing.
There's a great History Channel show about that, and about the guy who founded Marlboro. And so cigarettes in the 1860s were really considered to be like a woman's thing, and so they
because men were smoking
cigars or pipes, and so they had to. Well, first they had to come up with a way to roll cigarettes so that it was easy to do and it was inexpensive. And once they did that, they had to find a way to market it to men. But they did it because soldiers or workers, it was workers. Workers got got 15-minute breaks, and that was they got 15-minute breaks because that's the exact amount of time it took to smoke a cigarette.
Yeah, and you think about these guys, you don't want them hauling in pipes and but yeah, the mechanization of the manufacture of cigarettes is a fascinating thing. And even though my podcast is on food, I'm going to have to go into it because just tobacco is so tied up into the development of consumables in the U.S.
And marketing. The marketing, because Edward Bernays, the father of modern propaganda and marketing, was he became so because he was the man who made Lucky Strikes like a popular brand, and he sold Lucky Strikes as a cigarette that women could smoke, and he did it as part of the women's suffrage movement. And so he grew he doubled the amount of people who were smoking in the United States, and he was pushing women's lib. But so that was a really, really important thing. And then when his wife got lung cancer, he became the most vocal advocate against cigarettes. And he was the one who started all the anti-smoking campaigns that then got smoking banned in basically everywhere in the United States.
It does strike me as hilarious that here's this guy who's looking at what's the fastest way to double market share? Well, double the number of people who will smoke. Those women aren't smoking.
Yeah, there's all these women standing around who don't have lung cancer. Let's get them in on this. And this is totally off topic, but Edward Bernays was also a Jewish man, and he was Edwin Goebbels' primary inspiration for all of the Nazis' marketing campaigns. They were all based on the ideas of a Jewish man.
That is weirdly one of the least surprising things to learn about Goebbels, because talk about a twisty little dude.
Or Joseph Goebbels, not Edwin Goebbels.
Yeah.
Joseph Goebbels.
Yeah.
Edwin Rodman.
But the connection between the development of using wood for paper and then cardboard and then marketing is just, it's mind-boggling. You can't have...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're talking about the cardboard boxes for the cigarette. Yeah, we're off on a tangent here, but that's a fascinating show everybody should watch.
Yeah. But another little thing that popped in, and I know it's not historically accurate, but it's where my brain went, when Atoy is saying, "Oh, you poor little baby, you just got the shit kicked out of you," but in the most honorable way. I was like, that's basically Tiger Balm that she brings out.
at the time, snake oil was an actual thing that was being sold, and
Yes.
a lot of the snake oils that were being sold were either Asian. They were either marketed as Asian formulas or as quote unquote Indian formulas, as Native American formulas, and that was just as a marketing thing because the lost mystic knowledge of the Native Americans or of the the Chinese.
Far
Yes.
East, the mysterious Far East. Yeah. But that just was something that made me laugh. But it's a real thing. There were people who, we look at stuff like, Icy Hot or Ben Gay now, they have a long tradition in a bunch of other things, and people are starting to realize, oh, hey, this stuff is actually helpful. Okay, so we move on to sort of the contrasting the three women in different scenes, and you see very clearly Atoy and Mai Ling know how fragile their power is and how hard they have to work to hang on to it. And Penny, I feel like, Penelope Blake is just finally realizing that this bastion of power that she grew up in, the walls are much thinner than she ever realized. And she's sort of like, oh, if I step outside of my cage, I'm in danger. And she doesn't quite know what to do with that information yet.
Well, I think that's probably really representative of how a lot of women felt at the time, because this is one of the first generations of truly like heavily educated women who had a lot of leisure time. So now they're being filled with information and then just like, all right, so now try to move around as little as humanly possible, but have as many babies as you can. So try to just shut the fuck up and have a lot of babies if you could.
In fact, the 19th century is pretty unique. You had up until kind of somewhere in the 18th century where women were functionally equal in society. American society or colonial society was really disorganized. There wasn't a lot of legal structure, and every single person who was there, if they weren't contributing, society would fall on its face. So women's work was seen and understood to be just as essential as men's work.
Women in New Jersey could own land and vote up until like the early 1800s.
Yeah. And so somewhere in the 18th century, when you started to get a more organized legal structure, and they went with basically British law, where women were not full citizens, they were functionally children, property of their fathers or husbands, or even of their eldest children. So you could, if you had no elder male relative and your husband was dead, your oldest son would basically be your guardian.
And that actually, it's important you bring that up, because that is something that we see in this show, because the acquisition of property for a Chinese woman proves to be incredibly difficult in ways that I didn't even know that any of this could have been possible. It just seems like such an unnecessary, barriers to progress in every way for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, when you get people realizing that they're sort of outclassed by other people, or they understand they're not as smart and they're not as skillful, well, then they cheat. So, and that's happening. That's a lot of what's happening with the American government on the West Coast. Instead of taking these people into their society and building up a greater one, they're like, we would rather not progress just to deny you anything.
Yeah. And it seems to be a recurring theme in the United States, and even down to the way we discuss things. Like, if you'll watch a British show about someone who is sent to prison, they will not say nothing about justice. It is that when they are sent to prison, they are punished, and then when it is done, their punishment is over. Like, they are back in society and they are human beings again, which is not something we have a sense that justice is never done in the United States. And all of our penalties for crimes are incredibly retributive as a result. Like, we're trying to get vengeance on the person for committing this crime, which makes no sense.
And it doesn't help the person who was affected in the first place either. And I've always wondered how much that has to do with kind of our underlying, religious fanatical basis, where it's sort of like, original sin. Once you're bad forever. There is no chance to reform. There is no ability to leave your your crimes of the past behind, and this whole thing. Yeah.
And it seems to go back though to your thing, what you said of like, I would rather my life be shit and your life to be unimaginably shit than for both of our lives to be good. And they set up the system in such a way that they put people outside of the system. They're basically classless, and they're the untouchables, and so, criminals or whoever, and because they're legally set outside of the ability to succeed. And so, like you said, they have to cheat, they have to do this, they have to do that, they have to be able to win in some way, they have to make a living. And so it seems like the way we've established American civilization, and it's grown out of the 19th century,
definitely has,
from this retributive idea and the selfish idea that I got to climb on the next man to get ahead kind of thing.
And I think there's also a funny thing about the development of America basically until the 1960s. If you had a group of people, or if you were a person who didn't fit in, you could always go away. There was always somewhere that was away. Yes. In America. And we have finally, in the 21st century, sort of reached the boundaries. There is no away. There's no place where you can go where you're unknown. You can completely start over. You can leave your past behind. And the 19th century, I feel like, is the prototype. It was hilarious because you look at the newspapers at the time, they weren't even giving a person's full name. It was just like, if they gave any part of your first name, it was H or J or, whatever your first initial was, because nobody gave a shit anyway, and the newspaper articles were only a sentence. So if it was like, H. Henderson was a fake doctor in Danbury, but we ran him out of town, nobody's going to have any idea that D. Danbury, in the next town over, is the same guy, because you reinvent yourself everywhere you go. Nobody has any idea. Nobody can say shit to you because they don't know. In fact, that was one of the jokes from one of the really, really old Simpsons episodes when Bart Simpson gets the collie dog, and so he's saying, yeah, I won him in a truth-telling contest 2 towns over, and everybody's like, but
that's amazing.
But that was the kind of nonsense that, things worked on. You look at, how the railroad and then the automobile allowed this whole new galaxy of scams to grow up, because you just go from one town to the next town to the next town, because that town is not talking to that town. And it took a while for your bad name to get around. And as long as you stayed, that great quote, one step ahead of the law.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially since there was barely any law then. And what little law there was both drunk and on a take.
Yes. And so, speaking of the law or not the law, that is when, the Shays kind of get run out of town by the fire brigade standing there to just defend the other houses.
Yeah, that was a Fahrenheit 451 fire brigade. Oh my goodness. They showed up and burned the house down.
Bingo. The O'Sheas turn out not to be important enough to bother with. Nobody wants to deal with it anymore. They were trouble from the beginning. The Chinese are out to get them. The Irish are out to get them. The best thing for the O'Sheas is just to pick everything up
bricks.
And I don't know, go work for the railroad in South Dakota.
Yeah. Or they could go up to your neck of the woods, to Seattle.
I don't know how the Norwegians would feel about that.
Oh, was Seattle a Norwegian town at that point?
There actually wasn't much Seattle to speak of at that point, but there was a lot of that wave of Northern Europeans, Germans, Norwegians, Swedish, who were coming across. They had probably spent some time in New York, had gone on to Chicago, because that was sort of the frontier that had a lot of opportunity. And so they just sort of kept pushing west. The big land grab.
I know a lot of Swedes ended up in Minnesota.
That too, yeah, because the farming was very similar in terms of the dryness. It was a lot hotter, but they also knew how to deal with the snowy winters.
Well, that makes sense. And go ahead.
But a big thing was land was cheap. They were short on codfish, but the land was cheap.
Oh, well, I don't know what you do when you're short on codfish. That's quite a crisis, but it's fun to imagine. So we got San Francisco at the time is this crazy multilingual bloodbath, and then Seattle is just nothing but the Swedish Chef. Just a bunch of people saying "horge de borge" and whacking each other with wooden spoons.
That's more the Midwest at this point. At this point, Seattle is just
You said
like
Norwegian, and the Swedish Chef is actually a Norwegian stereotype. They called him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what the Swedish make fun of the Norwegians, and they say that's the way Norwegians talk.
Yeah, well, the Norwegians came in actually a little bit later when Seattle became more of a fishing town. It really started out as a logging town and then the gateway to the Yukon and the gold rush up there, which in the timeline we're working with in the Warrior show is about 10 years down the road.
So, yeah, we're still 100 years before the Seattle industry turns entirely to grunge and coffee.
And computers. Computers and coffee.
Oh, yes.
You can't extract the computers and the
Computers,
coffee.
coffee, and Kurt Cobain.
There you go. Yeah, I really like where we are. I feel like the board is laid out. We know all of our fighters. We know a lot of, what baggage they're coming in with. And I feel like, okay, I know their alignments, but I have absolutely no trust they're going to stay that way.
At this point, you don't know where this is going to go. All I know is I am dying to see Leary fight Ah Sahm. I'm dying. All over again. I know how it goes, but it's exactly like the first time I watched this show. From the very first second, I was like, they're going to fight. I want to see him fight. Let's go. Every show. Want to see him fight. And I also want to see fight Mai Ling's enforcer. His name escapes me. The Buddhist monk looking guy who's always smiling. And he's going to it's going to be such a great fight.
Even though you said early on this isn't a romance show, it's a fight opera, there is still the will they want they. It's just who's going to fight who.
They get Romeo and Juliet right at the end. They were like, oh, you thought we were going to have a romantic subplot. Romeo, Juliet, what's up?
Yeah, for me, that was sort of like the two most clueless people who thought they were safe meeting up and going, oh, I guess all of that training we did, whether it was social or in fighting, doesn't actually keep us as safe as we thought. And they're like, yeah, we might be getting a clue that maybe this is a bad idea. I mean, that never stopped anybody from doing anything, but I think they know it's a bad idea.
I think they're just like, our lives are a disaster anyway, and we're going to die at any moment. We might as well fuck. I don't know. Let's have some more cocaine and opium, and we'll talk it over.
Yes. All right. So we have episode 4 coming up. The O'Sheas won't be in it, but everybody else will be. And, that'll be interesting.
Well, before we finish, I want to. I started because I had it kind of playing while I was making something to eat, and episode 4 started to play, and there was a game at the beginning of episode 4, and I just wanted we need to look into 18th century gambling a little bit, because I am not entirely familiar with all the games. I know they played Faro and not poker, but that's the sum total of my knowledge. So I think that might be fun to get into, because there's a game being played on a slate with red and black. It might be, what is that game with the spinning thing?
No, roulette.
No. Roulette, but I didn't see a roulette thing, but it had kind of, the red and black. So I'm curious if we can get in a little bit to the, because the Vice is the most fun part of this stuff. So getting into the Vice a little bit might be fun. Oh, and that's the Vice. It was the show on the History Channel is The Vice That Changed the World, and it's about gambling, cigarettes, alcohol, and I think that's it.
The world. Yeah, they're a little too early for video games, but yeah, that's the next Vice that changes the world.
Oh, have you studied not ping pong, the
pachinko?
No, the pinball. Have you studied the history of pinball at all? Because pinball is literally the intermediate step between gambling and video games.
No, but I don't know, but I've always suspected that there is a connection somehow between pachinko, the Asian kind of like game of chance, and pinball.
I believe pachinko machines influenced pinball machines, but I'll do some more research on that. But pinball was really, there were no paddles at the beginning, and it was basically you just bet on what hole would go down, kind of along the lines of like like a roulette, only you drop the balls from the top and they kind of ping pong down. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. So it's like teeny tiny horse racing.
And then they end up in a number at the bottom. Yeah, so it's a kind of a like that. And then they added the paddles because there was no game, like there was nothing that would keep people kind of invested in it. So the opportunity to like keep your bet alive basically is why the paddles were invented. And then it just kind of exploded from there.
Okay, so yeah, pinball machines, and then we developed like Pac-Man and everything like that. Galaga, Space Invaders.
After there were huge Vice roundups of pinball machines where they smashed them all, and Anthony Comstock got involved in pinball machines, and they treated them like opium dens.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. The amount of like Vice policing that was very, very stupid that set us back. Like Vice policing Anthony Comstock in New York City in 1904 shut down the second bodybuilding competition that was going to be held in the United States. The first one caused riots because they had oversold Madison Square Garden so much. People started rioting in the streets because they couldn't get in. And
I can see that. Oh my God. Sure, let's just keep selling tickets. Why not?
Bodybuilding was so popular. People were like killing each other to get into this. And Anthony Comstock shut the whole thing down and said, nope, we're arresting anybody who puts up a poster for this stuff. It's indecent. This is disgusting. These women are out there in bathing suits. It's psychotic. So, yeah, they...
The American attitude toward Vice, even as a little kid, I always saw Americans as like, we don't know how to do the middle. We're either way Puritan or we are way depraved. And it's like... yeah, you can be just like a little depraved. You can decide I'm not going to drink for 3 weeks. You don't have, like, we can't do the middle. Yeah. And that's always been our problem.
Yeah, it's even down, and I'm not trying to take a soapbox stand here, but I was actually thinking about that with AA earlier, because they do this bizarre thing of demonizing people who drink and demonizing drinking and then saying it's anonymous, but then they make their entire social circle about people who do nothing but relive old drinking days. It doesn't make any fucking sense. And it's like, you could actually probably go see a therapist and figure this out. Whatever is driving, I figured it out. So like, I know other people could. You don't have to drink yourself to death. Everything's not a light switch. It's not always on or off. It's more of a dimmer.
Yeah.
But we don't have dimmers in the United States. We only have light switches.
Yeah, I have to wonder, again,
to that point,
how much...
our rugged individualism doesn't allow for nuance.
Precisely. Instead of saying, hey, we're all individuals and we got to kind of rub along together, it's like, no, my ideas are all right.
Yes.
And yours are all wrong.
Exactly. So I'm going to go live off-grid, and then when I break my leg falling out of my jankily built house... it's going to cost the social services of the nearest locality an insane amount of money to come save me. But I don't care about that inconvenience and cost and how it's going to cripple their social services system. I'm just going to go live out in the woods because I'm an individual.
That is a funny thing, that we think of ourselves as these rugged individualists, and yet when we get into trouble, we expect to get saved.
Yeah.
I'm not going to wear a seatbelt because fuck your laws, but if I do get thrown out of my car, where's the ambulance I'm not paying for with the taxes I'm not paying?
Yeah, even like Westboro Baptist Church. Like, I'm going to go and pick fights at funerals, but if you touch me, I'm suing everybody.
Right. So... I don't know. So you've listened, leave a review, and hey, go ahead and subscribe and tell your friends. So tell me again what you do with the rest of your time.
I am very active on social media, so please go add me on Instagram. I'm Plague of Strength on Instagram. My website is plagueofstrength.com, and that's where I've posted all my long-form stuff. I have over 2.5 million words on that website, with another million in unpublished drafts. And then I have written many, many books. I've got books available on my website and on Amazon on topics ranging from powerlifting to general history to all kinds of lifting history. And then I even have old school synopses. It's just a compendium of all of my old writing. If anybody wants to get deep into it and learn all about all the crazy old diets that I've dug up and researched heavily, you can learn about the pH diet and the Neanderthal diet and every other kind of diet that is out there. I even read the Skinny Bitches books and researched and picked those things apart line by line. My God, they're horrendous, but
there's something in there for everyone. I go and watch some of your stuff, and it'll remind me of things I'm going to have to include in going into the 19th century, and people I've never heard of, and movements that tie back into everything I'm interested in. So it's definitely worth going and looking at.
So I love that you have the same idea with food that I have with lifting and martial arts. So why don't you tell everybody what you have going on?
So you can find me on my podcast, The History of American Food. I spend more time on Twitter at THOA Food, but I wander around looking at people's stuff on Instagram.
I thought Twitter was only angry old white racist men now.
They definitely have their part of Twitter, but I hang out in the corner of Twitter with historians and librarians and cooks, and
there's still a leftist Twitter. Who knew? All right. What's your Twitter handle?
Oh, I'm at THOA Food, both on Instagram and on Twitter.
Nice. And next episode, we will have to discuss the food that we've seen eaten in these episodes so far, because I have not seen stew being eaten, and I've actually yelled about it now, because I feel like we've seen a lot of meals eaten and zero stew, which to me seems like a historical inaccuracy, so I would like to discuss it.
That's fair. I guess that's it. You'll need to join us next week when we go on to episode 4 for the rather threatening episode, The White Mountain. We're on Instagram at PCG Podcast, and you can always reach out to us by email at pcgpodcasters@gmail.com. And you can find more dope beats like this one from royalraven.com.